Hi guys, it's Summers here and thanks for joining me for my end of the first test debrief. If you haven't already, go and grab yourself a brew, a packet of biscuits and let's settle in because it's going to be a long one. We have quite a lot to get through. The first test has been a roller coaster. Quick times out of the box for Ferrari, slow times all round for Mercedes and the case of a missing Williams. And when it did finally show up, from a technical point of view, it actually looks half decent. Anyway, before I move on, I'd just like to remind you that if you go on to enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to know the moment that I put stuff up, also hit the little bell for mobile notifications. If you want to be so kind as to support my efforts, you can also head over to my Patreon page, which the link will be down in the description box below. And if you don't already, find me over on Twitter at SummersF1, where I put most of my musings first and oftentimes get a little ranty about the state of the sport. Now we've got all of my promotion out of the way, let's get on with the debrief. Straight out of the traps, I'd urge you to temper any hype or excitement or actually any disappointment that you might have had when you've heard about the performance of any given team, as in some respects the times are pretty meaningless. Everyone has their own run plans for the day, which can take a number of factors into account, from general fault finding and error processing, such as how to clear certain codes if you hit a problem, like simulation work, to setup, tyre analysis and error correlation. Each team works at their own pace and in a non-distinct pattern, but in general, the first test is a bit like when you get a new pair of shoes. You can't just go out and run a marathon at full tilt. You have to break them in. Testing is a little bit like this for the teams, where you're off the pace and getting yourself up to speed in bursts until such a point that everyone's comfortable to stretch the run plan. So, if you've been sucked in by reports of Mercedes being off the pace and Ferrari comfortably leading, then the reality might be a little bit more difficult to bear. I will say though that the Scuderia are looking in a good position, but we've yet to really see the full array of tyres used by both cars, and so there's also more question marks about how much or how little each loses or gains when it comes to the setup compromises that must be taken between compounds. This is a problem that's often exacerbated when you visit a different circuit too, and then you start to see a little ebb and flow between the perceived pecking order, with perhaps one team or even a driver not able to get the absolute maximum from their car and setup. At this juncture, I want to talk tyres, as whilst no one wants to admit it, they're actually pretty important when it comes to performance, and one of the ways we can use to decipher a pecking order. For this and the second test, the teams have had access to all 5 compounds that will be available throughout the year, but rather than have a rainbow of colours in 2019, we're getting just the hard, medium and soft, which is the white, yellow or red sidewall tyres. So this should make things easier for people to understand. Having chosen to run a thinner gauge rubber at a handful of races last year, Pirelli have opted to run that gauge throughout 2019, as it means the tyre is less prone to overheating and blistering. They've also adjusted the tyre temperature windows too, and I think it's quite important that we understand what that means. If I just run through them quickly, the hard C1, which is the hardest tyre possible, has an operating window of 110 to 140 degrees C. The hard C2 is 110 to 135 degrees Celsius. The medium, which is the C3 and won't change throughout the season, is 105 to 135 degrees C. The soft C4 is 90 to 120 degrees C, and the soft C5 is 85 to 115 degrees C. This is particularly important information because it really makes a difference to how the tyre operates if you can keep it within that threshold. And there's also a sweet spot within those thresholds as well, which obviously each car will have a different way of getting to that sweet spot. Certain cars will also have a better tyre that they can operate within. So it's very important for the teams to work on these tyre compounds at testing to make sure that their car is set up the best way possible to achieve the optimum lap time for each of those tyres. The other thing that's quite important for 2019 is a change that Pirelli have made, which sees the maximum tyre temperatures of the tyre blankets at the rear go down to 80 degrees Celsius, while the front remains at 100 degrees Celsius. This will help with front tyre warm-up and reduce the risk of graining, especially in low ambient temperatures. Now, as I say, all of this information might seem mundane, but trust me, it counts, and you'll see how some patterns in performance emerge if you follow it closely enough. Moving past tyres and onto the teams, I like to follow the current championship order on these sort of rundowns. So without a wheel turned in anger, we'll go through them where everybody finished last year. Obviously that puts Mercedes at the front of the pack and the team to beat, and usually the one that puts the hammer down during testing. However, this year they've seemed a little bit off of the pace and a little bit further down the pack. Mercedes fans should not worry at this stage though, as the Silver Arrows are known to turn up in launch specification, conduct all their systems check, get a feel for the car and start pumping in the mileage. Generally they have their power unit wound down and have plenty more aero trickery to come for the second test. In fact, it's worth noting that the W10 was actually utilising a relatively small cooling outlet at the rear of the car, suggesting that they aren't pushing the power unit at this stage. Bottas and Hamilton both climb behind the wheel of the W10 each and every single day, with one taking the morning and one taking the afternoon session. This is actually a clever tactic if you don't want to annoy one driver more than the other, especially if you have too many stoppages or reliability issues that lose time for the team and the driver. Bottas and Hamilton both took to the wheel of the W10, splitting the sessions each day. This is actually a clever tactic if you don't want to annoy one driver over the other, especially if you have too many stoppages or reliability issues that lose the team and driver track time. Where Mercedes perhaps have an upper hand over the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull is their use of the hard tyre, with their quickest times of days 1 and 2 set on the C2 compound. Okay, so I'm just going to run through each driver's lap count and the quickest time they performed on that day and which tyre they did it on, which is obviously quite important information because some of the times will seem quite adrift to the headline times that you might have been made aware of, well down into the 1:17 markers for the quickest time of the testing out there this week. So we got Bottas completed 69 laps with a 1:20.127 on the hard C2 tyre. Meanwhile, Hamilton did 81 laps on the 1:20.135, also on the hard C2 tyre. Day 2 of the test saw Bottas complete 89 laps with a 1:19.535 on the hard C2 tyre. Hamilton, meanwhile, completed 74 laps with a 1:19.928 on the hard C2 tyre. On day 3, Bottas did 88 laps with a 1:20.693 on the medium tyre. Hamilton responded on the prototype tyre with 94 laps with a best time of 1:20.818. For day 4, Bottas completed 57 laps. With the soft C5 tyre, he did a 1:17.857. And then Hamilton did 58 laps with a 1:17.977 on the soft C4 tyre. Moving on to Ferrari, and the Scuderia caught the headlines in the opening few days of the test, with times that already exceeded those from testing last year. However, they've since been eclipsed, and word also came down on high from Pirelli that the track surface, which was new when F1 tested there last season, has also evolved to a point where the surface roughness would provide quicker times. As I covered in my analysis, the SF90 is an evolution of last year's car, with a huge amount of time gone into refining concepts rather than reinventing the wheel. However, it's worth noting that the car is marginally longer than its predecessor, and the overall cooling package has been altered, seeing as the airbox is now much smaller, moving stuff into the side pods. I don't think we can really go any further without discussing that matte paint. It's a bit of a Marmite scenario, some people suggesting that the car looks orange under certain conditions, but at the end of the day it's a decision made on technical grounds, as it saves weight, a sum in the order of grams, but weight nonetheless. The mileage racked up by Ferrari over the test period has actually been quite impressive, and Vettel completed 169 laps on day 1, I bet he had a sore neck after that, with a headline time of a 1:18.161 on the medium compound. Charles Leclerc followed that up on day 2 with 157 laps on the board and a headline time of 1:18.247, also on the medium compound. Vettel then followed that up on day 3 with 134 laps, this time doing a 1:18.350, again on the medium compound. Then Charles Leclerc on the final day of the test did 138 laps with a 1:18.046, once again on the medium compound. So you'll note that all of their quickest times came on the medium compound, a trait that we usually see from Mercedes, as it leaves many question marks to their rivals when comparing times. But have they spent too much time on the medium compound? Moving over to Red Bull, who are a little adrift from Mercedes and Ferrari in terms of the mileage covered, which is perhaps understandable seeing as they've switched to Honda power for 2019 and probably wanted to be a little bit more cautious. The car itself shares all the usual Red Bull DNA, with a high rake and extremely paired-in side pods, which are even more slender than usual given the switch to the Honda power unit, suggesting that gains could be made from aero to overcome any marginal power differences. On day one of the test, Max Verstappen was at the wheel and completed 128 laps, with the best time of a 1:19.426 on the medium compound. Gasly responded with 92 laps on day 2 with a 1:19.814 again on the medium compound. Verstappen on day 3 did 109 laps with a 1:18.787 on the medium compound, and then Gasly did 146 laps with a 1:18.780 again on the medium compound. So, like Ferrari, their fastest times all came on the medium tyre, but the best news for Red Bull fans is not only do they seem relatively good on pace, they've done a great deal of mileage too. But perhaps the real test will come at the second test when they try to turn things up, especially as there's been a report of them suffering from a vibration that unsettles the car. However, it's early days and gripes of this nature are to be expected with a new supplier, and at least it hasn't gone up in flames. The Renault RS19 that arrived in Barcelona was actually a little different to the one that was shown at the launch and in the renders, and features a different pair of side pod deflectors, two-piece wing mirrors, a T-wing, and perhaps one of the most aggressive slotted rear wing end plates on the market, which featured bodywork in the transition zone, actually making a cluster of upwash winglets in their own right. In terms of mileage, the Renault team were actually a little adrift. In fact, they were quite a way off of the top 3, with Hülkenberg completing just 65 laps in the morning session on day 1 with a 1:20.980 on the medium tyre. The Ricciardo taking over and completing 44 laps with a 1:20.983 again on the medium. On day 2 it was split again, and Hulk went for 95 laps on the medium tyre doing a 1:19.837, whilst Ricciardo did just 28 laps again on the medium tyre doing a 1:19.886. On day 3 Hulk managed 63 laps with a 1:18.800 on the soft C4 tyre, whilst Ricciardo, also on the soft C4 tyre, did 80 laps and a best time of 1:18.164. On the final day of testing, Hülkenberg did just 24 laps with a best time of a 1:17.393, the best of the test, and that was on the soft C5 tyre, so the softest tyre in the Pirelli range, whilst Ricciardo did 34 laps with a 1:17.785, again on the softest C5 tyre. I'd suggest that the car is a solid contender and bears a significant resemblance to last year's Red Bull. I wonder if Daniel took some of the blueprints with him, which already proved itself in terms of being able to cool the Renault power unit. Renault are running a new iteration of their power unit that has its basis in the Spec C1 run by Red Bull and Ricciardo during the latter phases of 2018. The times look fairly good and they actually closed out the test on top, but let's remember that they were on the softest tyre compound and their run mileage was mediocre. So let's move over to Haas with their black and gold Rich Energy branded VF19, which is clearly a step on from last year's car in terms of refinement. The thing is with Haas, they will always be there or there's about, simply because they design a car that's not on a knife edge, very compliant and relatively easy going on the tyres. Where we may see their model struggle this year is the pace of development, considering the likes of Renault and McLaren will have made steps relative to their budget, whilst Alfa Romeo appear to have made a step forward that could put them in striking distance too. In terms of times, Grosjean took to the wheel on day 1 and completed 65 laps with a headline time of 1:19.159 on the medium. Both Magnussen and Fittipaldi took the wheel on the second day, with Magnussen completing 59 laps on a 1:19.206 on the medium tyre as his quickest time of the day, whilst Fittipaldi completed just 12 laps on a 1:21.849 again on the medium tyre. On day 3, Grosjean did 69 laps with a 1:19.060 on the medium tyre, and Fittipaldi did 48 laps with a 1:19.249 on the soft C4 tyre. On day 4 of the test, it was Grosjean with 64 laps on a 1:18.563, again on the medium, whilst K-Mag took over and did 66 laps with a best time of a 1:18.720 on the medium tyre. I think the jury is still out on Haas in terms of their overall performance, but I think they'll have the pace to sit comfortably in the midfield, take the fight to those around them when needed, and constantly pick up a solid points haul. So let's move over to McLaren, a team that can't really get any worse than they did last year, but you get the sense that they've at least got on top of many of the gripes that they had with the MCL33, with the MCL34 having some really nice design cues that might win it some awards, if there was such a thing. You can check out my thoughts on the car in the link above, as it's actually one of the more interesting cars on the grid. So let's check out McLaren's times. Carlos Sainz Jr. completed 119 laps on day 1 with a 1:18.558, his best time on the soft compound C4. Norris took over for day 2 and completed 104 laps with a best time of a 1:18.553 again on the soft. Sainz took the wheel on day 3 and completed 90 laps with a best time of a 1:19.354 on the medium tyre, and then Norris took over again for day 4 with 132 laps and did his best time on the soft C4 with. What's encouraging for McLaren is that their mileage count is pretty high and their times aren't too bad either, albeit showing their hand on the softer tyre. You'd also have to say there still appears to be work to do, but the signs are more encouraging than last year. So now it's time to move on to Racing Point, who didn't actually launch a 2019 car, instead opting to do a livery launch using the 2018 car and a 2019 front wing. So I expected a small fanfare when they rolled out at the test, but they did nothing. They just got on with it. So because I didn't do a launch analysis of that particular car, let's give you a run through of the few things of note. The front wing is not dissimilar to the one tested by the team back in Hungary and features what we'd term a middle of the ground front wing based on the designs that we've seen so far from everybody else. They've also opted for what I'm going to term now as a semi-raised front suspension upright, with the upper wishbone able to be placed higher than normal, but not at the full height that's possible. This has all been done to accommodate their new side pod solution, and they're the latest team to switch to the low slung side impact spars and periscope style inlet, taking more of a Red Bull twist to it, as they have the over the top winglet that spans the car's width, whilst the inlet is much narrower beneath to improve flow into and around the side pod. Beneath the side pod, a vertical flow diverter can be found too, encouraging the flow to take a line around the side pod rather than peel off and destabilise the flow moving across the floor. It was more of the same when it comes to the rest of the car at this stage though, with the team having already admitted that T1 was just about getting a feel for the car and establishing some baseline setup and performance parameters, with a large scale update not actually due until they land in Australia. In terms of mileage and times, Perez completed 30 laps on day 1 with a 1:19.994 on the medium compound tyre. Stroll took to the car on day 2 and completed 79 laps, with his quickest time coming on a set of medium tyres with a 1:20.433. Perez was back at the wheel for day 3 and completed 67 laps with a 1:20.102 on the medium tyre, and then Stroll did 72 laps on day 4 with a 1:19.664 on the hard C2 tyre. It's also worth noting that an update did arrive for day 4 of the test, as the RP19 was outfitted with a new floor, complete with vertical fins on the outer edges to help airflow circulate through the longitudinal slots already there. It's a design feature tested by both Ferrari and Red Bull in the latter phases of last year, but has yet to actually be raced by anyone. The Sauber Alfa Romeo is a car that raised eyebrows when it was first seen at the shakedown in Fiorano, primarily due to the extreme front wing design. Now, I'm not going to get into a huge amount of detail when it comes to that, as you can follow the link on screen now to a separate video that discusses the wings we've seen so far. However, what I will say is that I liked the car's predecessor, the C37, as it was a bold design that offered and delivered more than was expected of it, and I'm hopeful they followed it up this year with more resources and personnel at their disposal. Talking about their personnel, Raikkonen completed 114 laps on day one with a 1:19.462, the quickest of their times of the day, set on the medium tyre. Giovinazzi meanwhile did 101 laps on day 2 with a 1:19.312, his quickest time of the day, on the soft C4 tyre, before handing back over to Raikkonen for day 3, and he completed 138 laps with a 1:17.762 on the softest tyre, the C5. Giovinazzi meanwhile did 154 laps on day 4 with a 1:18.511, his best time of the day on the medium compound tyre. So as we can see, they've certainly banged in the mileage, and hopefully that will set them in good stead in terms of chasing extra performance in the second test. We move on to Toro Rosso, who are in their second year of supply with Honda, having done all the donkey work for Red Bull last year, and it's likely they'll take the pain when it comes to any aggressive test work that needs to be conducted this year too. As you'd expect from Toro Rosso, the STR14 looks like the usual step forward you'd expect, but I'm not expecting it to set the world alight, and nor should you. Irrespective of that, Kvyat completed 77 laps on day 1 and did a 1:19.464 as his best time on the soft C4 tyre. Albon did 132 laps on day 2 with a 1:19.301, again on the soft C4 tyre. Kvyat then did 137 laps on day 3 with a 1:17.704 on the softest C5 tyre, whilst Albon completed 136 laps with a 1:17.637, again on the softest tyre. And then we move on to Williams, and where do you start? Firstly, their car being late to the party is nothing new to F1. Perhaps in modern terms it is, but I think perhaps what they may have been better served to do, knowing they were going to be late, was rocked up with the FW41 instead. The problem here is that it also takes some planning, including compliance from Mercedes high performance powertrains, on getting an old specification power unit to run that car. However, it may have spared them some blushes, and more importantly have given them some baseline data on this year's tyres, something even running in the last 2 days of the test they've been short on. Of course, having the final car on the last 2 days of the test is heartening, but the times were not good, and feedback from the drivers doesn't seem too impressive. However, from a technical standpoint, the FW42 is at least interesting, and once again, seeing as I've yet to do an analysis on this car, I'll give you a quick overview now. The front wing is at the conventional end of the spectrum of what we've seen so far, with the 5 flapped elements drawn up to the top of the end plate as you'd expect. However, where their wing differs is the use of the flap adjuster, which is angled across the last portion of the wing to deflect flow across and around the front tyre. The front suspension has some very interesting aspects for us to discuss, starting with that upright extension that raises the upper wishbone, which is far more substantial than any of the other ones that we've seen before, and runs in extremely close proximity to the tyre sidewall. This, in combination with the sizing of the extension and anchor point for the wishbone, will clearly have an impact on the airflow passing around the tyre and the wake that it creates. The wishbone shroudings have also had extensive work done on them, utilising as much real estate as possible in order to guide the airflow rearward towards the side pods, whilst at the back of the lower wishbone, a thin element compounds the effect they're looking for. The team have also taken advantage of the extra length available to them in the bargeboard region, joining them to an under-chassis winglet. Having jumped on the high periscope side pod solution last year, the FW42 takes it to another level, with the pod itself pushed even further back, as the horizontal part of the pod vane has now been divided into 2. They've also elegantly merged the wing mirror and its stalks into the forwardmost element of the pod vane, the design itself drawing inspiration from Ferrari's mirrors from last season, but with the main mirror body being a little taller but extremely thin to allow for numerous flow conditioners to surround it. The side pods have perhaps the largest undercut of any, with many of the periscope options forcing teams into a more squared off frontal region. The large undercut has also allowed the team to squeeze the waistline of the side pod before it tapers in toward the coke bottle region. They're also the third team to present their car without a full-blown shark fin engine cover, following in similar footsteps to both McLaren and Sauber, who also have a small vertical stabiliser at the base of the cover spine. As we've already mentioned, Williams were late to the party, with Russell taking the wheel first on day 3 and completing 23 laps with a 1:25.625 on the medium compound. He followed that up on day 4, completing 17 laps with a 1:20.997 on the medium tyre, whilst Robert Kubica got his first taste of the car on day 4, completing 48 laps with a 1:21.542, his quickest time of the day on the hard C2 tyre. Right, now we've gotten through all the teams, perhaps we should have a think about what all those times and the tyre compound information means, and I think you'll agree that once you look at the adjusted times, there's still plenty of question marks. The reason that I say there's question marks is that Pirelli tell us that they understand there to be roughly 0.6 seconds between each tyre compound, which would mean that all of the Ferrari powered cars would round out the top 3 once adjusted, with Mercedes the next non-Ferrari powered car to feature in the list, and they'd be half a second adrift. Now, if you believe that Haas and Sauber have leapfrogged Mercedes, I'll be astounded. But what it does make us do is realise that no one at this stage is prepared to show their hand, and are still likely working out how to get the best from the tyres, be it the C1 to C5, with all 5 of those compounds giving a different performance window. And if you remember the operating window temperatures that I gave you earlier in the show, you may start to understand why they're so important, especially as the headline times from each day could be set at any point in the driver's stint, and could just be at the point where they start to hit that temperature sweet spot and the tyres start to give them their best times. So it's very much a game of cat and mouse, and one the teams thoroughly enjoy, and it's just part of the gamesmanship. In fact, it's just like Mercedes saying they're struggling with a handling issue during an event in Turin, something that has been turned into a thing right now, but in reality could just have been a throwaway comment about how they're currently struggling with balance. Something you'll always do when you're working with a new car, and something that is possible to tune out once you understand how to get the best from the setup. As you can see, we've got through quite a lot in this debrief, but there was plenty of questions that came through on Twitter too. So I'm just going to field a couple of those to add to the end of this episode. The first one coming from Ryan Motorsport, and he asked, how do you think Mercedes and Red Bull will react to the completely different, innovative front wing concept that Ferrari is using? Okay Ryan, well, the difference between the wings is included in another video, and I won't go too deeply in those. But what we have here is the team is trying to deal with the outwash problem. The FIA have tried to limit the amount of outwash that these front wings can generate. Unfortunately, the teams really want to create that outwash because it leads to more performance for the rest of the car. And so what we've got here is all of the teams bearing out different design directions to try to find the best way to improve not only the performance of the front wing, but also the performance of the entire car. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see how we see all of these teams react going into the start of the season. Clearly, the design that we've seen on each of these cars so far is not the first interpretation of the wing, and they'll have been through many iterations in their wind tunnel models and CFD beforehand. So Mercedes and Red Bull may have actually in fact looked at the design that you see on the Sauber or Ferrari, but felt that it didn't work with their particular car at that particular time. Or they'll come with that design later on once they've decided that it actually provides the level of performance that is suitable for their car. Okay, so the second question that we've got coming in comes in from Gianluca Calvasari, and he asks, why are we seeing so many fairings on the rear suspension this year? Is this a way to recover aero efficiency lost from the brake duct simplification? Okay, so firstly, there's not really been a brake duct simplification on the rear. We've only had a simplification on the front end. So I'm wondering whether this question is regarding the actual front end, because we are seeing quite a more aggressive development phase coming from the front suspension this year. Certainly in terms of using the upright extension that we've seen from Mercedes in the past. We now have McLaren, Renault, Sauber, and Williams also all utilising that particular design concept. So in terms of the way in which the suspension is used, the actual mechanical aspect is never really any different. All of what the teams are looking for is in regards to aero, and because they've had some of the simplification made to the brake ducts from the FIA this year, they will try to recover some of the downforce that they may have lost. And we are starting to see some actual tricks appearing on the brake ducts themselves. Both Mercedes and McLaren have some very small winglets in the lower section that are carved into the brake fence itself, and I think that's an area of development that we'll quite clearly see other teams start to try to adopt. Okay, and then we have another question in from H2.0. Do the changes made to the cars bring big changes in how the cars will race, and if so, are these good or bad? Well, yeah, clearly we're going to have a change to the way in which the cars race one another, and the front wing and the simplification of the front brake ducts, the loss of the blown axle, were all designed to try to make it easier for the trailing car to follow in the wake of the lead car. We were trying to change the overall wake profile of the car in order that perhaps we head back more towards a slipstreaming scenario. That's never going to happen with the way in which Formula One designers try to go against the rules. But what we have had is an increase in the proportionate amount of drag that will be created by these cars, because the rear wing is much larger than it was before, and the designers no longer have the tools they did to be able to control the amount of wake and drag that was being created by the front tyres. So there is going to be a lift in the amount of drag, and obviously the DRS has a much larger window to open this year, and so I think that when somebody does have DRS, they will have more capability of being able to affect an overtake, and obviously that will have an impact on how the cars race. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it is to be debated, but what the aim of these regulations is to try to tone down the amount of downforce that was being created by the 2017 regulations. So we're sort of making a step backwards in that respect, and getting something that people have been asking for a long time, which was the simplification of the front wings. Okay guys, so we've gone on quite a bit there with this particular episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a very different exercise for me for this particular episode, doing a debrief. There's quite a lot of information there for you to get through, so hopefully I've answered many of your questions. I'm sure that you'll have more for me, which you can obviously either leave in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible with anything that I might be able to answer. You can also follow me over on Twitter, and I always answer people back on over there as much as I can. And if you did enjoy the episode, don't forget to hit the like button, and also subscribe to the channel for more Formula One content.